This is Musical Talk.
Musical Talk.
The UK's independent musical theatre podcast.
Musical Talk. The UK independent musical theatre podcast.
It is lovely on Musical Talk to be able to have repeat guests on my podcast. We've had a couple joining me in... Well, I'm joining him in his lovely, lovely London pad, is Leslie Bricusse. Hi, Leslie. How are you?
Lovely to see you, Nick.
Lovely to meet you at last, properly. I wanted to do this interview because we've talked in the past about very specific things on the podcast. I want to talk to you today because next year you're going to be... It's a very special year for you next year, isn't it? Tell us about what's happening then.
Unbelievably, it's my 60th anniversary in this dreaded profession.
Dreaded? Is that a joke, or have you had...
No, I love it, of course I do.
So there's lots... You're here in London planning lots of events.
Well, I'm actually in transit on my way to California, but I have lots of things always to attend to in London, so when that's needed, I come by.
And what have you been planning for your anniversary? Allowed to reveal anything?
Well, there are various things in the works. Nothing that is absolutely set in stone, though there are several plans which I think will come to fruition, especially a songbook show covering all my professional life, where we will do 60 songs in 2 lots of 60 minutes. So 30 plus 30.
There's a theme there somewhere.
Yes, it's all mathematical. You can't do 60 songs in a 2-hour evening unless you do what I'm doing, which is to make them a series of medleys, because if you try to do 60 songs, you are anticipating that you're looking for 60 lots of applause, which uses up half the evening. But with a medley, you anticipate the audience, so... Sometimes with a song, people applaud at the beginning of a song rather than the end of it if they're familiar with it. So it is a way that actually physically we reckon would cut 20 minutes out of the show.
Do you find though with medleys that you don't get the entire bang for the buck?
Depending on how we plan to do it, I don't think that will be an issue because you could still have a big ending and then top it with the introduction to what follows it. So it depends on the medleys, and they involve so many different people I've worked with and stuff on my own, that we think we've got a good game plan emerging.
Mike Dixon is one of our co-presenters here on the podcast, and I'm guessing he's probably involved with some of these because you're very close with him, aren't you?
Never go to the bank without Mike Dixon.
I'll keep that in mind. For a Christmas episode, we're going to have Tony Hatch on the show. And he worked very famously with Petula Clark, writing lots of her songs. I want to first ask you about your musical of Goodbye Mr. Chips, which had Petula Clark, didn't it? What can you tell us about that?
That was a film that, when I first went to Hollywood in the 60s to do Dr. Dolittle, Goodbye Mr. Chips was already in existence in pre-production, and it had been written. Terence Rattigan wrote the screenplay, and Andre Previn, who was the hotshot composer, musical director, and he became my first great pal there, and he was married to his lyricist, Dorrie Previn, and they, as I was doing Dr. Dolittle, were completing Goodbye Mr. Chips, but it was for the same producer who was producing my Dr. Dolittle, a man called Arthur Jacobs, who was known as Apjack, Arthur P. Jacobs, Apjack for short, who was the hotshot PR man. He was Marilyn Monroe's press man. He was a very famous character in Hollywood. And so Chips was already in being, and then what happened, Dolittle kind of overtook it because they could never cast the film of Chips. In fact, Arthur Jacobs had an album released at the end of the filming called The Losers Sing Goodbye Mr. Chips, and it had 52 songs that were not used in the film, and he had a sort of joke LP cover which said, starring Julie Andrews and Julie Christie and Samantha Eggar, and he had that 5 Mrs. Chipses and about 8 actors as Mr. Chips, none of whom were eventually involved in the project. And that was an MGM movie. And what happened was, Andre and Dorrie and I, we played each other our scores, as friends did in that era. and MGM turned down their score because it wasn't sufficiently English. And they asked me if I would take it over. And I said, A, they're my pals, so I can't. And B, I would help Dory with the lyrics in any way that was appropriate. But that didn't work. And in any case, Andre was leaving Hollywood at that time to become a serious classical conductor, and he went to the Houston Symphony Orchestra then. And their marriage broke up, so it was a real mess. And Andre asked me and his other pal who directed the film, Herbert Ross. It was Herb Ross's first film as a director. He went on to a very distinguished career. And we very amicably arranged that we would take over the project. So I ended up doing it and Herb Ross directing it.
Was anything kept at all of the original, or did you rewrite everything entirely?
No, we had to start again. It's amazing. What do they say? England and America are two countries divided by a common language.
Yeah, English.
And that is really what it was about, because there are little hints of Americanisms everywhere, little phrases that work in the United States don't work here, so it was much better to go back to square one.
Well, speaking of that, I want to ask you your thoughts on Willy Wonka and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, now playing here at the Theatre Royal Drury Lane. I was listening to the beautiful Cheer Up Charlie song that you and Tony Newley did for the film, and there's some very, very nice rhymes in there that only an English person would come up with. The American writers, bless them, because they sort of think about mostly Cockney phrases and trying to rhyme those, there's something very, very English about especially Cheer Up Charlie.
That hadn't occurred to me. I think it is always the same thing. I doubt most English writers can write American any more than American writers can write English if the subject is a specifically English or a specifically American piece.
Within the new Charlie and the Chocolate Factory musical is Pure Imagination, which is a wonderful... I was at the first preview of that show, and when those kind of opening rhythm starts, the whole audience just went, oh. There's a story behind this, isn't there?
There is indeed a story, yes. The story is that Tony Newley and I, after we did our movie all those years ago, in 1971, wanted, obviously, to look at the long-term thought of a stage musical. And we met with the widow Dahl. Roald Dahl had died by then. And Lissy, his wife, without explaining why, did not want us to do it. And that was that. She eventually allowed me, because in the meantime we lost Tony Newley, she eventually allowed me and an American writer called Tim MacDonald to do a stage version for colleges, universities, amateur rights in the United States, which we did about 10 years ago, and that's had thousands of productions every year since then. That's worked very well. But I never knew the reason that she wouldn't let me do the grown-up version. And I found out only last year that when the original Willy Wonka movie was made, Roald Dahl wrote the screenplay. And David Wolper, the producer, did not like the screenplay as much as he wanted to. He thought it was a little dated, and he wanted it brought up to the then date. I never read that screenplay, so I don't know, and I can't imagine that happened because Roald Dahl is always current, it seems to me, even today. So they brought in another writer called David Seltzer who completed the screenplay, and I think they shared the credit. But apparently, and this I found out from the director, Mel Stewart, who told me this at lunch in California a couple of years ago, and he also has now left the building, he died last year, that Roald Dahl said, I will never let anybody touch any aspect of this project again, meaning anyone associated with that film. And that, I believe, I've never been told whether this is the fact, is the reason I think we weren't allowed to do it, because the score had been very successful for the show, but I think they observed his wishes and wouldn't let anybody associated with the film be associated with the stage show. So it went to these other gents called Mark Shaman and Scott Whitman, who had written the musical Hairspray. Again, a more contemporary vein. And what they were going to do with it is to turn it. They wanted to capture the British music hall style.
Oh, did they?
And I don't know quite what that meant, but that was the intent, I know, because I read that in the press.
It's a difficult thing, I think, to put to stage without doing too much to it, because Charlie as a character doesn't really do anything. He just sort of is nice from the very beginning, and everything crazy revolves around him.
Charlie is the hero. I mean, the whole point of the story, I have always believed, is the fact that he is a good kid, and each of the other 4 golden ticket holders have one massive vice, and the moral of the piece is if you do that, you will not succeed. That's what our Oompa Loompa song was about. So all that happened, as far as I'm concerned, I got a phone call at the beginning of the year from Sam Mendes, who directed it. I was in California. He said that they were going to use... Warner Brothers had contacted my lawyer first to say that Warner Brothers insisted on having Pure Imagination in the show because they wanted to link it up a little bit with the old film. So we let that song go in, and that's the story.
If you want to view paradise, simply look around and view it. Anything you want to, do it. Want to change the world, there's nothing to it.
Leslie, our friend Mike Dixon asked me to ask you about, he simply said, Tchaikovsky, Gershwin, and Sunday Dallas. I'll let you take the lead from now on.
Okay, well, they don't have... Well, they do have a little bit in common. 2 of the 3 have a little bit in common. Tchaikovsky, he's referring to, is an animated, what has ended up being an animated film that we are just... That's why I'm going to California next week. Now called The Great Music Chase. Going back quite a long time, this originated with Gene Kelly and myself, so that's quite a long time ago. We had become pals. He was my hero growing up. I mean, the king of MGM musicals, and he and Fred Astaire were everything from that era, and Fred even further back. And they both came into my life. Fred Astaire was a neighbor in Beverly Hills, and Gene I met when I was working at Fox on Dr. Dolittle. Suddenly the door of my office opened. He came in. First thing he ever said was, "Hi Leslie, Gene Kelly, I want you to write the song for my movie." He was directing Walter Matthau in a film and wanted a song for the film. And that's how I met John Williams, who in those days was known as Johnny Williams. We were all very young. Gene and I became friends, and he was asked to do this giant American-Russian co-production involving all the great arts groups of Russia, the ballet, the Bolshoi Ballet, the Kirov Ballet, the Moscow State Circus. It was a gigantic concept which I never really believed could physically happen, and in fact it couldn't, because these vast groups were always on world tours, and there was no way to coordinate the whole. So the whole thing kind of got buried under the weight of both its budget and its pretension. But I remember Natalie Wood. I suggested Natalie Wood for this lead because Natalie was Russian and spoke Russian. Her parents were Russian. Anyway, I loved the idea of what we were going to do because it was going to be built around the Nutcracker Suite. And I had started writing English lyrics to the piece. And when it fell apart, I decided to stay with it, and I wrote a completely different screenplay, small, linking the story of the Nutcracker to 2 young people and an adventure that they got involved in where the little girl had to find out her identity and travel several hundred miles in 5 days, and it's set in 1908. It's now called The Great Music Chase, and after a lot of thought, my current producer in Hollywood, an old friend called George Slaughter, suggested it be animated because it was a very complicated thing to do. and animation is the perfect answer for it. So that's what we're doing. The screenplay is written, score is written, it's ready to go, and that's why I'm off to pursue it next week in California. That's that one. Gershwin. A few years ago, my wife Evie and I spent Christmas in Hawaii with Liza Minnelli and her husband. And on Christmas morning, Liza and I were watching the film An American in Paris over breakfast, which her father had directed, Vincent Minnelli. And when the ballet sequence at the end, again Gene Kelly, so it does have Gene Kelly in common, when Gene Kelly and Leslie Caron are dancing the ballet at the end of An American in Paris, Liza said, "I've always wanted to sing that being da-da-da-da-da-da-da-dum." So I said, okay, let's put a lyric on it. So over the holiday, I put a lyric on it. And when I was doing it, Gershwin having been, when I was a very young kid, my key into this business, it was the Gershwins, first of all, who got me into it. And of course, they were part of the MGM musicals, so all this stuff linked up in my life. And as I was writing the lyric, I realized, thinking of the rest of An American in Paris, how it would all sing. So I set the entire thing to lyrics, by turning it into a little one-act play. It's 20 minutes long, I suppose, American in Paris, the full thing. And that led me on to Rhapsody in Blue, which led me on to Concerto in F, and over the next 3 years, when I wasn't doing anything else, I ended up with this massive Gershwin set to lyrics, which was, in some people's view, sacrilegious, I suppose, because this was instrumental music. I approached the Gershwin family, and over a couple of years spoke to the heirs of the estate. I befriended Ira Gershwin, who was not involved in those things because they were just music written by his brother. But he was sympathetic to the concept, as were various other people. But I could not persuade the nephews of the estate, the heirs to the music, to go along with it and to make a collaboration whereby we could do it as a theatre piece. So there would have been advantages in it for them because the copyrights in a way would have extended for my lifetime plus another 70 years that the music
because the music's out of copyright now, isn't it?
Well, the point is that's what I had to do in the end because I put so much effort into it. I tried everything to get them to do it and share it, but they wouldn't do it. So now it's public domain, except in the United States, where it's about to become public domain one piece at a time, because the American music copyright laws are different than ours. I am working with various people, including Mike Dixon, on assembling it for what we are going to do. I think we're discussing with the BBC a kind of making of how it all came into being. BBC Worldwide in America and BBC 4 over here are helping me, and we'll see where it ends up. But that is also something that would be late next year, like my 60th anniversary. What was the third one?
A Sunday Dallas, which sounds the most exotic of them all.
Sunday Dallas is a new show that I've been writing, which is about three different Broadway musicals set in the 1950s. And it's about a girl, an aging gypsy who's kind of in her mid-30s, and she's never quite made it. It's affected her marriage, and very simply, as a last desperate attempt to become a Broadway star, she auditions for whatever's left in the season, and by a little bit of trickery ends up being an understudy for three different shows. And of course, in Act 2, all the leading ladies are off on the same night.
Hilarity.
And so that's the middle of the second act. That happens.
Forgive me, it sounds farcical, or I mean, is it?
Yes and no, because there is an alleyway on 45th Street in New York where three stage doors empty into the same alleyway, and that's what gave me the idea. The Majestic Theatre, the Royal Theatre, and the John Golden Theatre all are in the same alleyway, the stage doors.
It's a bit like we have in London with the Noel Coward and the Wyndhams.
Exactly. Yeah, in that little alleyway where Sheiky's is. So I went ahead and did it, and I've got two Broadway directors interested to do it. I think I know which one I'm going to go with, and I'm talking to two managements, one over there and one over here, because although it's a Broadway piece, the American director and I both think that we might try to open it over here first, so that this would be, as it were, the out of town, rather than risking it with the American end first. But it's a tour de force for the girl in the lead. I mean, she gets to sing 4 different scores, our one and the 3 shows she goes into. There are 3 different styles. There's one show set in Paris, one show set in New York, one show set in Beverly Hills.
But they're new musicals within the story. They're not existing.
Well, one is a very old musical that's been running forever, like the Mousetrap play. It's an old musical. One is the new hit of the season, and the third one is the first night. So it's a new show opening for the first time.
Wonderful idea. It sounds.
Well, it's fun, and I think it's funny. And anyway, we'll see quite soon, because I'm in talks with producers here, and also I've got a New York producer. But I think I would like to begin it here.
So going back to your original statement, I mean, writing in the American vernacular, you've obviously lived in America a long time, so I guess that makes it easier for you.
Well, it's not that I've lived in America. I started loving American songs with the Gershwin brothers when I was like 5, and that stayed with me. And then in my childhood I fell in love with all the MGM musicals, where the greatest assembly of talent, it's never been matched since, what the Gene Kellys and Fred Astaire's and Judy Garland's and but especially the creators. I mean, Gene Kelly was also a director, Stanley Donen. Amazing people did those shows, Bob Fosse, Michael Kidd. It was an amazing assembly, and a man called Arthur Freed was the head of it all at MGM. And Arthur Freed was also a songwriter. All the songs in Singing in the Rain are Arthur Freed songs, and it's probably probably the best musical of that type that was made in that era.
Did you see it here?
What, of Singing in the Rain? No. I saw the movie probably when I was at Cambridge 30 times. I know every inch of that film, door to door.
That project does sound really, really exciting, so I hope we'll see it materialise.
A lot of projects in the world are exciting. If the statistics on musicals, of every 100 musicals that are written, 1 gets produced, and of the ones that get produced, 1 in 8 succeed. So that's 800 to 1 going in. So if you write a show a year, you could wait quite a long time for success.
Looking at 60 years next year, so you've been writing lyrics and other forms of entertainment for 60 years. Do you think your style, I mean, if you were to do what Steve Sondheim did and wrote a book of all your lyrics and things like that, and you were to study them, do you think you'd see a difference in style as the way audience imaginations and expectations have changed over the last 60 years?
Oh, yes. Well, I mean, what's interesting is that we were very friendly with Steve Sondheim in the 60s when we first went to Broadway, and he was doing his first score. I mean, he'd done the lyrics for West Side Story and Gypsy, but his first show where he did both was A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to the Forum, and that was when we went over with Stop the World, I Want to Get Off at the same time as that. And his shows are Sondheim, that amazing style that is uniquely his, which comes from his brilliance with words, and he's also a top talent composer as well. I think all his scores have his signature heavily on them. I'm a little bit more of a chameleon in that if you write for different movies at different eras, like the style of Goodbye Mr. Chips is not the style of Willy Wonka, and Willy Wonka is not the style of, say, Victor Victoria. They vary a lot because you're writing for a story and characters that are wildly different. Steve's shows are, with the exception... Well, that's not true. I mean, if you're writing something for the stage, you write it in your style. I mean, his English show was Sweeney Todd. His French show was Sunday in the Park with George, but that is subjugated to Stephen Sondheim. I mean, Steve's signature is heavily on top of everything.
But do you think your style of lyric writing, I mean, has changed over the past 60 years, and your style of book writing?
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think I've adapted to whatever it is I'm doing, and I've collaborated with different composers because it suited me to. I write probably slightly more than half of my shows on my own. I write the book and the music and the lyrics. I like doing the whole thing if it's a project I'm keen on. And other times I've gone into other people's projects. I've been lucky enough to work with some wonderful people like John Williams and Henry Mancini and Tchaikovsky and Gershwin. Anyway, and my partnership with Tony Newley, all the early shows he and I did together, that was like being two halves of the same person. We wrote the book, the music, and the lyrics, sitting here like you and I are sitting here now. And I was never quite sure who did what. It just evolved from the two of us. And it was very strange. We wrote Stop the World. Our first show, we'd never written a song together. We just had become great friends, and we had a great sort of brotherly instinct. And we wrote Stop the World in 21 days, and we wrote the score in 8 days, 14 songs in 8 days, and never changed a note or a word because we were under pressure to get it on in a short period of time. Every time you start a new project, it's like a new life. You know, you're in Paris in the 17th century, where I've just been before Sunday Dallas. I've done a musical of Cyrano de Bergerac. And you become part of that world for as long as you are involved in it.
I associate you with British classics because one time we talked about Scrooge at length, because that was, you know, Albert Finney was the film I grew up. The first version of Scrooge I ever saw was that, and Goodbye, Mr. Chips, and, you know, Stop the World. These very, very, very classic British Sherlock Holmes as well. And I want to.
Oh yeah, English literature. I've ravaged English literature. I mean, Pickwick, Jekyll and Hyde. Yes, quite a wide variety of projects.
Leslie Bricusse, thank you very, very much for talking to us.
My pleasure, Nick.
Again on Musical Talk, and it's been lovely to sit here and look at your absolutely stunning view over the Battersea Bridge. But thank you very, very much, Leslie, and I'm sure we'll talk to you again soon.
Thanks, Nick.
This episode of Musical Talk is copyright 2013.